Hello. Hi, Willow. Oh, wow. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hello. Can you hear me? We are experiencing a little bit of technical difficulty. Am I coming in clearly? Like you could listen to me talk for half an hour and not be super annoyed. Yes. Great. Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. Hello. Welcome, everybody. Oh, so lovely to see you all. Oh, great. So, welcome to the Saturday Sit. We'll get started with a little bit of shamatha meditation to drop in and settle. So finding yourself in an upright position. The purpose of this practice is to find a state of focused relaxation. So if you have a way that you like to do that, you can do that now, or you can follow my guidance. Begin by coming into the body. Just to feel the body. Send out a global invitation to relax. Whatever tension might be there now. Relaxing the face, all the little muscles of the face, forehead, scalp. Relaxing the shoulders, letting any tension there drain out from the body into the earth. Letting the arms hang completely without tension, like wet rats. Totally releasing any tension. Relaxing the belly. Letting the belly hang down to the floor. As you relax, noticing that it feels good to let go. Leaning into any feelings of ease, well-being, spaciousness. Relaxing the upper legs, and in particular the inner thighs. Contacting tension and letting it release, letting it flow out of the body. And bringing your awareness to the heart area. Do a little breathing practice. each out breath, releasing any tension, relaxing the body. And with each in-breath, imagining breathing in a feeling of safety, love, heartfulness. You might use a phrase like love or feeling safe. Each exhale, relaxing. Each inhale, imagining love coming in with the breath. And so, can everybody, in fact, hear me still? Can I get a thumbs up? Ish, ish. We're having some trouble still. Some people are not having any trouble. Interesting.
Maybe we can try just
Increase
using
the
it
volume.
without the plug-in.
Oh, okay.
Being plugged into it. Can you just use the speaker?
I'll try that. Is this better? Is it much clearer now? Oh yeah. Okay, cool. Great. Awesome. All right, great. We'll just pass this around for the check-in. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Okay, so again, welcome everybody. I'm Ryushin, or Ryu, and I'll be leading today's Saturday Sit. This is my last Saturday Sit at Oak. I'll be going back to Vermont in about 2 weeks. I'm going to be sitting a little solo retreat before then, but this is the last Saturday Sit for me for now. And Tashin will be taking over for the next number of weeks. So it's been a real joy and privilege to be here with you all. And yeah, just delighted at this opportunity and honored, and it's been really fun. So yeah, first we'll start with a little check-in, and Sky will lead that.
Hi, friends. First, we'll just go around and each person will share their name. And today we'll share, along with our name, our favorite creative expression. Now, this can be something that you standardly think about of a creative expression like painting or making music, but it can also be making a simple meal for your family, going on a walk and enjoying your surroundings. possibilities are pretty open-ended. I'll start with me. I'm Sky, and my favorite creative expression is by far dancing. And next we'll go to Sam.
Hi, I'm Sam, and my favorite creative expression is programming.
Great. Thank you, Sam. How about you, Pam?
I'm Pam, and my favorite creative expression is teaching natural medicine.
Ooh. Great. How about you, Sandra?
I'm Sandra, and my favorite one is ecstatic dancing.
And thank you. And how about you, Morgan?
Hi, I'm Morgan, and my favorite creative expression is snowshoeing.
Fun. Thank you, Morgan. How about you, Chi?
Hi, I'm Chi, and these days I've been liking to mend my clothes, my clothing.
Great. Thank you, Chi. How about you, Gergely?
Hi, I'm Gergely, and for me, it would be music.
Thank you, Gergely. And Jeff?
Hey, I'm Jeff, and mine would be dancing, drumming, and singing all at the same time.
Great. Thanks, Jeff. All right, now over to Willow and Dancing Yuli.
Hey, I'm Yuli, and my favorite creative expression is the deconstruction and recombination of ideas by speech or thought.
Hi, I'm Colin. My favorite creative expression is saying things that are funny. I'm James, and my favorite creative expression is cooking for others.
I'm Uli, and my favorite creative expression was contact dance. I'm looking for something new. I'm really liking chanting, so maybe that's it now.
We are definitely fans of chanting over here at Oak as well. Thank you, Willow. How about you, Sam?
Hi, also named Sam. I've really been enjoying creating playlists as a creative expression lately.
Great, thank you, Sam. And Kathleen?
My favorite creative expression is gardening and tending the forest.
Thank you, Kathleen. We just got our first garden up and running here at Oak, and the lettuce and kale are sprouting. It's almost ready. Very exciting. And John?
I'm John, and my favorite creative expression right now is drawing.
Great, thank you, John. And Scott?
Yeah, I'd say my favorite creative expression is provocative conversation. And if that alienates enough people, the joy of solo running by myself.
Great, thank you, Scott. Sation?
Hi, I'm Sation. My favorite creative expression is dancing.
All right. Thank you, Station, and thank you, everyone. We'll hear now from our team at Oak. I'm just going to switch the camera back around.
Hi, I'm Koshan, and my favorite form of artistic expression is cooking.
I'm Ryu, and my favorite form of creative expression recently has been journaling.
I'm Keller, and my favorite creative expression is exhorting people in the Dharma.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. As always, I feel so much more connected to you all after that. And so it's really a pleasure to have all of your voices in the space. Today we'll be exploring the relationship between emptiness and healing. Now, if you came in through Facebook or the email, the title of this talk is based on something that Soryu Foral, the founder and head teacher of the Monastic Academy, once said, which is there's an unlimited supply of garbage in your heart. That's the title of this talk, which is, I thought was a very provocative and compelling statement that we could spend some time with. What does that mean? How do we connect the practices of cleaning up and waking up, these two different aspects of the path? So the reason I chose this topic to explore is, well, one, it's like very up in the larger healing culture. It's starting to inform the Dharma, this whole question and movement of healing the wounds of our heart, of trauma healing. And I think there's a really good reason for that. There's a significant amount of power and potential in that sort of approach. And there's also a number of potential traps as we begin to integrate these two different ways of growth, these two different methods or types of work that can be done to become trustworthy human beings. And so in this talk, I want to lay out some critical distinctions between these different approaches. I want to talk about the traps, some of the traps in the two approaches as we try to integrate them together. And then I'm just going to give out a bunch of tips that I wish I knew when I started kind of walking in this direction, trying to integrate the healing of the heart with insight into emptiness. So from the very beginning, it's extremely important to say, I think, two things. One is that this is an incredibly vast territory. This is very, very large territory that we're going to be wading into. And I'm only going to be talking about a very small portion of that territory. We could spend the whole week in conversation about this topic and really just be scratching the surface. And I actually think that the territory of emotions in the human experience is in fact infinite, right? And so we're just looking at the portion that has to do with healing and kind of like trauma and meditation. That's one thing. And then the other is that this is sensitive for a lot of people. Almost by definition, it can be quite emotionally charged. And so I might share perspectives that will feel provocative or challenging to certain views you have, maybe, in which case I would ask that you be gentle with yourself and also gentle with me, as I'm, kind of wading into territory that can be a little bit, heated potentially. So, with that being said, I'll make some initial distinctions. So the one way of framing these two different movements is cleaning up and waking up. This is a framing that comes to us from the integral tradition, integral theory, where cleaning up is the process and practices involved with bringing the kind of psycho-emotional wounds from our past into consciousness in order to be healed, released, and integrated. And waking up is the process of coming into alignment with our true nature, the process of awakening, In the Buddhist world, we would say it's seeing the truth of dependent origination and the emptiness of all things. So this process of waking up is a movement of less and less and less. It's a process of unbinding the world and letting go of all that we know, essentially. And so for most of us who have come to these Saturday sits, or who are kind of Buddhist oriented people, we are to some degree familiar with what waking up means. And so I'm just going to say that's what it is. It's this movement of understanding the truth of dependent origination. And then I'm going to spend a little bit more time unpacking what cleaning up is, because that might be, for some of you, a little more unfamiliar. So as I said, cleaning up is this, the practices and process of bringing your emotional, psychological wounding up and healing it. And one way we can frame this is by talking about the shadow. So the shadow is a concept that was developed by Carl Jung and Jungian therapy, Jungian thought in the mid-20th century. Carl Jung was a student of Freud. And that's really, with Freud is when the whole idea of the unconscious kind of entered the Western vernacular, although it was certainly present in the Eastern philosophical tradition well before that, it's important to say. And this idea of the shadow is that our shadow is made up of those parts of our being that we experience as unacceptable. Yes? So this is kind of the material that is there to be cleaned up is our shadow. And the shadow is those aspects of our being, the feelings, the emotions, the ways of showing up that we see as unacceptable. And in fact, the more that we feel a certain way of being or emotion or feeling is unacceptable, the more power it ends up having in our psyche. The more that we push it away, the more it actually exerts power over our psyche from the shadow. So one of Carl Jung's key insights was that these unfaced and unfelt parts of our psyche are the source of all neuroses and psychological suffering. He says that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Yeah, so this is the shadow, and this is what he's describing is this process of cleaning up, of moving into that territory of darkness and bringing it, lifting it up into the light. Soryu has said, again, at least I remember all the provocative things he says. I think he often says provocative things, but he said once that we would rather destroy the planet than feel our feelings. We would rather destroy the planet than feel our feelings. And as we sort of look in this direction, we can see that we spend our whole lives organizing around not feeling certain feelings, feelings of inadequacy or worthlessness or loneliness. We find ourselves, we create circumstances and relationships. We find ourselves in jobs even that somehow keep us away from feeling those feelings that we don't want to feel. And we don't even typically, unless we've done a significant amount of this kind of work, we don't even know that we're doing that, right? It's kind of operating in the background, in the shadow, yes, away from the light of consciousness. And so the work of cleaning up is this process of clarifying the shadow, bringing it into the light, becoming able to accept it, to open to it, to become intimate with it, and then to integrate it. So it becomes part of our conscious psyche. And it turns out, we won't get too much into this, but many of our gifts end up being stored in the trauma and wounds that are hidden in the shadow. And so that's a kind of really, really super brief sort of framing of cleaning up. And now I want to, shed more light by talking about the specific traps that we can get into when attempting to integrate these two trainings into our life of practice. I'll start with traps that typically occur on the Dharma side of the equation. So this is, typically what these are traps that I hear, people, if I go to retreat centers or hang out in Dharma groups, I would hear people kind of falling into these traps, and I've fallen into these traps at various times. So the first trap is something like, I don't have to do this kind of healing work. Meditation is enough. Yes, and we can look at the Pali Canon and the Buddhist suttas and see that nobody's doing psychotherapy. In fact, nobody seems to be struggling at all with issues of shame and unworthiness, self-hatred. It's actually very conspicuous if you read the Pali Canon and the sort of source texts of Buddhism. Nobody's dealing with these issues that, speaking as somebody who has, taught and lived at a meditation practice center for years, everybody that goes through those hallways tends to deal with. It's very interesting, right? That difference. And, one of the common stories that people will tell, Dharma teachers in the West will tell, is a story of the Dalai Lama, where it was a conference with scientists and meditation teachers from the West. And one of the meditation teachers asked the Dalai Lama, how do you work with self-hatred? What's your approach to working with self-hatred? And it turned out that after much confusion and attempting to translate, that there's just no word, no concept in the Tibetan language for self-hatred. The Dalai Lama was at a loss. He did not know how to answer the question because it was not a problem in his tradition. You can also look at these kind of psychoepidemiological studies that indicate that when Western culture comes to a land, that depression and anorexia and other diseases of modernity follow. Yes. And so one reason why the people in the Pali Canon weren't working with shame, and why it's not traditionally a part of the Buddhist ecology of practices, is because they had different psyches back then. For reasons that we won't get into right now, the late capitalist, hyper-individuated consumer culture constellates a particularly fragmented psyche that requires industrial strength defragmenting tools specifically designed to help it come into wholeness. And without that, you run the risk of reifying the shadow through meditation. And in fact, this is what ends up happening if you really take this far enough that I don't need to do the work of healing my psyche. Meditation itself can end up being an escape from feeling that which you don't want to feel. Yes, this is actually more common than one might think. You sit and you feel very, very peaceful. That's great. And then you walk into life and everything triggers you. So you run back to meditation. And maybe you even renounce more. Yes. Buddha talked a lot about renunciation. So maybe you say, well, that's just the path of suffering. So I'll just get rid of that. Maybe I'll go live in a monastic academy. Yes. Although when you get to the monastic academy, you realize that you're constantly forced to interact with people and all of their issues and your issues, and then you're trapped. But that's a good trap to be in. So that's one of the kind of failure modes of meditation. Another is that certain kinds of meditation can end up being a kind of violence towards our difficult emotions and our tender parts. So by no means is it always the case that these practices kind of act as a form of repression. But if we are only relating to our emotional life in this one way, then it can become a form of violence. And for example, I think there are many different practices you could do that would kind of head in this direction if you were monomaniacal about it. But for instance, we can talk about the dynamic of going back to your breath. Yeah, seemingly very simple practice of going back to your breath. What ends up happening from a psychodynamic perspective is that certain parts of your psyche are, we might say, crying out for attention, for light, for intimacy. And instead of going to them, opening to them, becoming intimate with them, instead you're just ignoring them and going back to your breath. Often what will happen is they'll get louder and louder and louder as they feel more and more ignored. Now, depending on how open your meditative framework is, you might say, oh, well, this just means I need to double down and get back to my breath. This can create a negative feedback loop and eventually lead to the shadow expressing itself in things like physical symptoms or sudden outbursts, things like that. Well, I won't get into that. Another practice that can be quite dangerous, potentially. Again, only if you do these all the time. The only problematic practice is the one that you do all the time. Yes, you actually want to have a flexibility of practice and approach. But another practice that can be problematic is the practice of seeing the impermanence of whatever's arising. Yeah, so in this case, say an emotion or a feeling arises, and you just dissolve it into shimmering vibrations. Yes, and you can do this as you get more practiced at meditation. What ends up happening is that you lose the information and the meaning that the emotion or feeling was attempting to communicate to you by dissolving it into flickering, strobing vibrations. Now, again, I'm saying this for the 5th time now, but you want to be able to do that. It's actually beautiful and a path of liberation to be able to dissolve your experience into vibrations. But it can also become damaging to the psyche if you do it if that's the only thing you do when a difficult emotion comes up, for instance. And so those are 2 examples of traps that I've seen people get into, or I've gotten into, when it comes to the Dharma and emotional healing. The traps of emotional healing itself, when it comes to the Dharma, is a little bit, well, it's quite different. One is very obvious and is probably in your mind already if you're a good Buddhist, which is that psycho-emotional healing has the propensity to be quite narcissistic. Yes, it can kind of amplify narcissistic tendencies in our consciousness, and it very easily fits into the dominant trend of this kind of narcissism in our culture, right? So it's all about your process, it's all about your emotions, it's all about your needs, on and on and on. And a degree of that, again, is really lovely and important. It's important to get in touch with those aspects of our experience, but it can become a kind of preoccupation, a kind of obsession with the self, which from a Buddhist perspective is dangerous and leads to delusion and suffering. That's the very obvious way that there can be a trap in that direction. The more subtle way, and this is probably at the edge of my ability to communicate, but I'm gonna try to do this, is essentially what Soryu said in the title of the talk. There's an unlimited supply of garbage in your heart. What does that mean? So it ends up being quite subtle. As we practice and explore the way that our participation constellates different experiences or gives rise to different experiences, we see that our views, the way that we see the world, is partly what determines the experience we have. Yes. And so if we have the view that the path is about dealing with our stuff, healing our trauma, healing and, purifying our stuck places, it turns out that we will then just keep creating more stuff. So I've met people who have practiced for decades, and this is what practice is all about for them. For them, it's sort of like meditation becomes a process of sitting and waiting for stuff to come up. And there's this, what is necessarily for them, an unpleasant process of kind of emptying out. And so with this view, sitting becomes inherently difficult. In fact, the more difficult it is, the better you're doing, right? Because it shows that you're really getting in touch with the difficult stuff. So what this fails to see is that what we experience in the present is not kind of there, wrapped up, and ready to reveal itself like some prepackaged material that just kind of like pops into existence. Instead, the karma of the past meets the factors of the present and dependently arises. So the trap here is that we give too much power to our past conditioning without seeing how factors in the present condition what we perceive. So I found a quote from Thanissaro Bhikkhu, who's a Thai forest monk in the US. And he says that when you experience a feeling of any sort, pleasant or painful, part of it is just the potential for the feeling coming from your past karma. The rest is the way you actualize that potential with your present intentions, your present karma. You fabricate the potential into an actual feeling of pleasure or pain. And so the trap here is that the whole path gets reduced to a journey of letting your stuff come up into consciousness and purifying it by being with it through mindfulness. What this fails to see is that through dependent origination, we can come to a point when difficult things don't arise at all. And in fact, that's more the progress of the path, is that we come into places, we learn how to unfabricate and let go such that these things don't arise at all. But if you have that view, that would seem to be moving in the wrong direction. You'd probably imagine that you were repressing things, yes? You'd think, oh, difficult things aren't coming up. What am I hiding from? And so what I believe we are seeking as we integrate these two different approaches is a kind of flexibility, sensitivity, and agility of view and practice. Right? So sometimes it's skillful to be a self with a history and with material to heal and with parents who could have done a little better. And sometimes it's skillful to let go of all of that, to unfabricate the self and the world, to let go of self and story. And the question becomes, what releases suffering now? What's skillful now? What's helpful now? And this questioning requires courage. It requires the courage to question the views and assumptions, both within the Dharma culture, as well as within the larger healing culture. That's really what is most needful, right? Because we want to be able to become intimate with difficult emotions. We want to be able to move in that way where we can hold challenging emotions like we would hold a small child. And we also want to be able to completely let go and rest in space, to rest with the breath, to rest with the ease of the freedom of emptiness. We don't want to get stuck in either one. We want to have the freedom to do both and more. So as you can probably tell from the talk so far, there is just so much material that this ends up feeding into. I ended up, I have like 2 pages back and front for this talk. That's cut down from about 10 pages. There's just an enormous amount of complexity and nuance here. And so hopefully some of this will just be like trailheads for you if you want to dive deeper into this inquiry. I've been, really obsessing to a large degree over this integration for the last 2 years, and I feel like I'm still a total novice to it. But those are some of the obvious traps that come from attempting to integrate these 2 trainings. And now I want to share some tips, we'll say, some things that I wish I knew when I first started. I guess for me, what happened was that I had been meditating pretty in a pretty hardcore way, sitting lots and lots of silent retreats, just really going for it, trying to wake up. And at some point, I realized that I was being motivated by a sense of deep inadequacy, actually. That the reason why I was throwing myself into the path so much was because I didn't feel like I was okay in some fundamental way. And at that point, there was a real shift. I was like, oh, maybe I ought to actually look at this inadequacy instead of trying to become this awakened individual. I think it was particularly difficult for me. I mean, I was like, 19, 20 years old. And so there's a kind of psychology of the young American male that I was also a part of. And it was I'm glad that I did what I did. And I'm even more glad that I kind of started turning towards these difficult emotions and patterns. And so these are some tips that I wish I had known at that time. So these are in no particular order. If you have, and I'm going to say a lot of different things. So if you want to write these down, there's probably something in here that will be very useful for you if this is a kind of area that you're interested in. So the first thing is that healing happens through connection. So on a fundamental level, healing happens by bringing our attention and our curiosity to that which is suffering. This is the case in both the Dharma and in the realm of emotional healing. And it can be helpful to take on this view, to take on this way of seeing that pain, emotional pain, or even suffering, phenomenological suffering, is how reality asks us for attention, presence, and kindness. Yes. So when you feel emotionally activated, you can start to read that as almost like a call for your loving attention and inquiry. That's one tip. Another is that, and this is more for the hardcore Dharma people, but feelings are not just to be let go of. In fact, they hold vital information. Now, this is a whole other talk in and of itself, but an example of this is, anger. Yes, anger is often seen as a defilement within the Buddhist tradition. But in fact, anger tells me what I value, what I'm motivated to stand up for or stand up against. It has important information for my life. What angers me? Why am I angry? Well, it's usually there's something at stake there, something that you care about a lot. That's true for all feelings, actually. They contain useful information. Now, if we have an outsized emotional response to some situation or experience, that indicates that there's some kind of trauma or unhealed wound kind of intertwined with the useful information. So if I get reasonably angry in a situation, like I don't know, somebody treats somebody else badly, and so I get angry, that's one thing, and I kind of stand up for them. It's another thing if I just completely lose my mind, right, and just completely like get aggressive or violent even, right? That indicates that there's some healing work to be done around anger and around that situation. But we cannot disregard the fact that feelings actually carry very vital, important information. So another tip is that in order to let something go, we first need to see that we are holding on to it. And so what is extremely helpful with this is differentiation. And this is a lot of what we teach at the Monastic Academy. And in fact, it's one of the primary kind of methods of many forms of psychotherapy. It's learning to put words to your experience of feelings. So there's a name for the condition by which you cannot describe how you're feeling. It's called alexithymia, the failure of the ability to connect language with feelings. And it turns out that by differentiating, by naming what we're feeling, it gives us a handle with which to interact with our feeling life. If we don't do that, it's much easier for feelings to kind of recede into the shadow and control us or influence us without our knowing. So when we make these distinctions, we kind of bring it into focus. This allows us to work with it. And as a part of this, we know, and this is, you can spend hours just playing with this on the cushion actually. When you get the right delineation, when you get the right name, when you find the true name for an emotion for you or a feeling, there's a feeling of resonance. Yes, there's a feeling of resonance in the body. And we can, kind of just name in this direction, there's this whole inquiry into felt sense and focusing that Eugene Genlin discovered in the mid 20th century or late 20th century. So again, it's very important to learn how to differentiate our feelings. So instead of just a whole like sound and fury signifying nothing, and just like an uproarious feeling life, I can sort of become very attuned and sensitive. And well, I'm feeling this, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling dismissed, or I'm feeling confused. You can start to give color to that world. And when we nail a feeling statement, when we really actually say the words that resonate, there's a kind of foreground background switch. And this is, I think this is actually the kind of like the shadow coming into consciousness, right? Where the feelings that we're embedded in become an object for us. And this is a critical movement in the process of healing and the process of just emotional literacy. So another tip is that one of my teachers said that jhana is the opposite of trauma. Jhana is the opposite of trauma. So just as trauma is a state of intense contraction of the being, a sort of like fixation on difficult or challenging emotional states. That's what trauma is, or how you create trauma, you might say. Jhana, on the other hand, these states of deep samadhi, deep concentration, are states of fixation on extreme well-being, safety, and ease of the nervous system. So, and this is a fascinating relationship, and one of the dynamics that I've become most interested in is the way that trauma and fragmented psyches obstruct the harmonization of our being that leads to samadhi, right? So as we heal our psyche, it becomes much easier to enter into concentration states. It becomes much easier to sit down and harmonize the body mind and to settle, and then to feel a sense of well-being and safety and ease. And like many things in the Dharma, this is a mutual dependency, right? So as we settle down, trauma can be more easily healed. As trauma is more easily healed, we can open more and more to these states of well-being, and on it goes. They're kind of creating a positive feedback loop of healing and well-being and freedom. You can also use this in the other direction, where if you find yourself unable to settle down, unable to access a feeling of well-being and relief, and say following the breath or relaxing the body isn't getting you there, isn't really working for whatever reason, you can start to be curious if there's something going on, some feeling happening in your body that you actually don't want to feel. Yeah, because something might be up. Some part of your psyche might be fragmented out and calling out for attention. And if you give it that attention, that kind, loving attention, it might settle down and allow a kind of harmony of the energy body to take place. And so in general, as a kind of rule of thumb, if you're stuck in repetitive thought loops when you're sitting, that's an indication, not always the case, but it's an indication that there's something you're not wanting to feel. This is really critical, actually. So if you're just kind of like lost in papancha and thinking and looping thoughts again and again, and you keep trying to come back, but you keep getting taken off, it can actually be appropriate to look at like, what am I thinking about? And what might it be indicating about my emotional life right now? Yeah. You might be able to read from that some kind of pattern of emotion that you can then like kind of be with. Often we don't know how we're feeling because, again, we've organized our whole psyche not to feel the feelings that we don't think are acceptable. So you kind of have to like find your way into it. Another tip is that sometimes when you're working with your feelings, images will get thrown up. Now, one of the kind of teachers at the Monastic Academy, Doug Tatarin, who created the bioemotive framework, which is a fantastic framework for doing this kind of healing work, says that images are the language of the unconscious. And so that the emotional brain, you might say, speaks in the words of images. That's its language. That's how it expresses. And so if an image gets thrown up by your unconscious, it's a good idea to actually work with that if you want to do some healing. The typical Dharma response would be just to drop it. Yeah, so it would just be to ignore it and go back to the focus space. But if you want to do some healing work, you can turn towards the image and feel the resonances as you come into relationship with it, the kind of emotional resonances. So the last tip that I'll share for now is to notice how your perception is being colored and sculpted. So much of the work of healing and of releasing kind of feeling beliefs and stuck patterns is just discovering that they're actually operating, right? So this again is bringing them into consciousness, bringing them into the light. They control us and have power over us when they hide in the shadow. And so one of the unique affordances of Dharma practice is that we can become very sensitive to how we project ourselves onto the world. So when we are locked into some kind of pattern, the world tends to mirror and reflect back to us what we're holding on to. So this is actually, there's a beautiful aspect here where if you like practice a lot of metta or loving kindness, and you go for a walk after you've done that, the whole world is speaking to you of kindness and love. The flowers and the trees are made of love and are telling you that love is here. Yes. If you are trapped in a pattern of inadequacy, then everyone and everything you see will be a mirror of that, an echo of that. So there's a skill here, critical skill of, we might say, like reading your phenomenology, noticing how your perception is being colored moment to moment, and having that kind of indicate what is actually going on. So I had a friend who was very skilled at whitewater rafting. And we traveled together for a little while through California. And it was whenever we would drive by a river, he would describe it in the most precise detail, pointing out like where the whirlpools and the rocks were, where it was shallow and deep. And he could immediately and precisely plot out the safest route through the rapids. And so we can become similarly sensitive and discerning about our own phenomenology. We can learn to read our bodies, our perception, our relationships, and let them inform how we understand what's happening in the present moment. This skill of allowing the world to reflect back to us what's happening inside of us is part of how relationships become extraordinarily healing. Once we feel safe enough to reveal our projections to others, a whole new arena of healing opens up. So there's, again, so many more things that could be said about this. I hope that some of these tips were useful. Each of them, again, is a trailhead that we could give a talk on each of these tips. They're so rich. There's so much richness here. And really important that we don't run the risk of reducing our understanding of emotions to merely the domain of healing or letting go or awakening, right? Emotions are so much of what makes it meaningful to be a human. So much of it is at the core of what it means to be a human. And so I want to end with a poem that I think maybe will give a little bit of a different sense of how to relate to emotions. This is a poem by Hafiz. He writes, "Don't surrender your loneliness so quickly. Let it cut more deep. Let it ferment and season you, as few human or even divine ingredients can. Something missing in my heart tonight has made my eyes so soft, my voice so tender, my need of God absolutely clear." Okay, so that's the end of my talk. And now we'll move into a period of practice. For this period of practice, we'll be exploring how to relate to emotions in different ways. As always, if there's a I'm going to be, there's about like 4 different practices we're going to be exploring over the next 40 minutes. If you find one you like, stick with it. You don't have to follow me the whole way. But we'll be doing this for about the next 40 minutes. So find yourself in a comfortable seat. I'm going to take a drink of water. Begin by finding a posture that is both upright and relaxed. Making any micro adjustments that help you feel more relaxed or more alert. Sometimes even a few centimeters in one direction or another can make a big difference here. Settle into the posture, seeing if you can connect with the sense of stability, poise, presence. Begin with some shamatha practice and concentration practice. If you have a favorite method for this, you can go ahead with that now. I'll guide some breathing and body practice. Take some deep belly breaths here. Letting the belly fill up with breath, extending the exhale. With each exhale, letting your body relax. Letting the body and the mind settle with the breath. You notice tension anywhere in the body, bringing kind attention to that, inviting it to release. Tuning in to any feelings of ease, well-being, relaxation. With this practice, intentionally trying to move in the direction of a kind of energized calm. If you notice tension in the face or the shoulders, just relax that. And people imagine concentrating being hard or effortful and create a lot of tension in their face and their brow. So intentionally relaxing that area. Soothing the body with the breath. Next, we'll shift practice to explore working with becoming aware of the emotional body. Oh, stretching your awareness to cover the central axis of the body from the belly, through the solar plexus and heart, up into the head. Tuning into whatever is most prominent along that central axis. Could be a difficult emotion or a pleasant one, or it could be nothing remarkable at all. Tuning into any feeling sensations along the central axis. Really allowing this to express itself. Whatever's here, giving it plenty of space. If whatever you were paying attention to begins to subside, again, bring your awareness to the central axis and move towards whatever is now most prominent. With an attitude of allowing, welcoming, opening. Practicing turning towards the feelings that are here and letting them express in the body. You might notice that some feelings produce repetitive thoughts, certain loops. You notice that getting pulled in that direction, you can come back to the feeling in the body. you like, you can practice putting a word or naming this feeling. This practice, you're looking for resonance, the sense of inner rightness. If you're muted, it can help to say it out loud, or you can subvocalize it. Help to use the sentence stem. I feel, and whatever the word is. I feel happy. I feel afraid. Tuning in to the feeling in the body and trying to find the word to resonate with it. that feels rich, you can keep exploring that practice, or you can follow my guidance. Now, noticing any feelings of tension or contraction or any feelings you want to focus on, coming into relationship with that. In this case, preserving the sense of two-ness. There's me, and there's this feeling, this contraction. And seeing if you can offer it some kindness, some love. If it's a difficult emotion or feeling, relate to it as you would relate to a young child coming to you seeking support if they were feeling the same way. Hold it with that same tenderness, care, patience, understanding. Just as with a child, you can ask if this part has anything to share with you, anything it wants to express. Be curious, wanting to really get its world, their world. If that part begins to relax and let go, you can notice how that leads to more space in the body and turn towards another part, curiosity and love. Or if there's no tension in the body, you can just relax with the breath. And if you notice a part calling for your attention, turn towards it. Turn towards it as you would a good friend, somebody you cared for. That quality of warmth and openness of heart. If you like, you can continue that exploration or move on to exploring impermanence. Notice that whatever you're feeling is changing. Notice movement, flickering, vibration. Forget about content. Forget about the words, stories. Just noticing the fluxing, changing, vibratory nature of perception. Whatever arises, changing. Letting go into this river of change. You can notice change in all of your sensory experience at once, or you can pick a particular sense door. Changing, changing, impermanence. Nothing solid. Everything moving. Let reality flow. If you get fixated in a thought or a feeling, bring your attention to change, impermanence. Flickering, scintillating quality, vibrations. So next we'll have a short period of conversation, Q&A, sharing. This is kind of totally open space for any speech acts that you'd like to commit. And so, anything is fair game. You could just share what that was like for you, something you learned, something you struggled with. You could ask me a question. Yeah, whatever you like. The space is ours, I suppose.
Thank you for talking about this.
Hmm.
Because I think this is very much a problem, but I haven't heard actually many people talking about it. Yeah, and I mean, as sort of, I'm only getting into meditation now as a sort of a mental health tool. I think those are some good tips and traps to look out for. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah. It was a it was a very hard talk to prepare for. There's just so much here, such a rich intersection, and so yeah, I think partly it was so hard because I care so much about this topic. It's just so meaningful for me. There's been so much, yeah, so meaningful for me.
I'll just relate a little bit of my personal experience. It was really hard for me to find something that I felt comfortable going into a lot of story about at first. So I noticed that I had to sort of get clever about it and look for signs that there might be something interesting there. And so I sort of ended up using kind of an IFS approach and finding something that displayed any sort of like extra emotion, like anger, for example, or like distaste out of proportion for what like makes sense as a compassionate way of interacting. And so I ended up finding an area that I feel like I was basically spiritually bypassing. I was saying like, oh no, but I don't have to tell that story about myself because that's just a story. So it's not really important. Why would I self-victimize by telling this story about this thing? So that was the sort of like I think that would be called a protector in IFS language. But that all that to say is that there was a story in me that was sort of coming up in that way and blocking me from being able to spend more time with this particular kind of experience. And so I had a chance to look at that in more detail. And I did notice fairly strong physical results from that. So I just thought that was like interesting to share, having to sort of get clever about it and look for signs that something might be there because it's not so obvious. And so even though I'm spending time with a physical sensation, I'm not really thinking about it as a kind of emotion. And then realizing that, oh, actually there's this story about, oh, don't do stories. It was a spiritual bypass. And so I had to go around that.
Yeah, really interesting. Thanks for sharing it. It strikes me that like, it's just a story can be just a protective mechanism to prevent you from experiencing your emotions. And at the same time, it's valid wisdom in a lot of cases. So it's again, it like takes so much integrity and honesty to really know what's up basically in the way that's actually healing. And so yeah, thanks for sharing that. That's awesome that you stuck with it long enough to see beneath that.
Thank you.
Well, if there's no other anything else that wants to be shared, I'd be happy to move into meta. Usually we just do that with the last couple of minutes, but maybe I'll give a minute more if anybody wants to share anything or say anything.
Thank you. What hope is there of getting to the end of all of our difficult emotions, and what kind of relief can we hope for?
Is it, were people able to hear that question? Is that no? Okay, so here, let me.
Yeah, what hope is there of getting to the end of our emotional processing, and what kind of reasonable hope can we have of any kind of relief?
Yeah, thank you. People heard it that time, yeah? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so in terms of coming to an end, my sense is, this was kind of the topic of the talk. There's an endless amount of garbage in your heart. There is not an end to that process. You can, and I lived in Boulder, Colorado for 5 years. There are people who seem to be able to just endlessly heal. Yes, that's their path. They're just constantly headed for the next catharsis, dealing with trauma, usually from, at least their childhood, but in some cases from past lives, and on it goes. And part of what I was trying to point to, and I think it's really hard to make this point, is that if the path becomes just about healing, we will keep kind of creating material for ourselves to process. Yes. And so it really is endless. And actually, Soryu once said to me that it's when we realize, we finally come to terms with the fact that there's never going to be an end to our healing journey, that we fully commit to waking up. And they're like, this is not actually going to work. I'm never going to get to the end of this bottomless pit. And we then strive to wake up, to cut through everything completely. So that's, I mean, there is hope for an end. Although I do also think more pragmatically, there's probably like an 80-20 kind of analysis. Like if you really start to do this work, like I have struggled so much with inadequacy and worthlessness. And I feel like it's used to be at like a constant 7 and occasionally would spike up to like a 10. And now it's a 3, and spikes up to a 5 or something like that. It is a tremendous amount of difference. So saying that it's endless does not then mean don't do it. It means like have the right kind of hopes and the kind of right framing for it. And then in terms of what kind of relief we can hope for, I like the framing of like coming to be a good parent to yourself. So more and more now, when difficult emotions arise, I really do turn towards them, when I have enough presence, turn towards them like I wish my parents turned to my difficult emotions that I had when I was a child. And I'm able to hold them with that kind of presence and space and kindness and understanding. And in that kind of quality of attention, they open, they heal, they express themselves, and there's a kind of movement. And I think that there are some parts that you heal, you just heal, and then they don't come up so much anymore. And so there's also that. Yeah, that's my sense. But I still feel very new to all of this, frankly. Yeah. I think one of the things I wanted to kind of, or I feel called to agitate against in general, is the kind of model that the path or the practice gets rid of all difficult emotions, or gets rid of all emotions generally. There are some people that have that view. And I actually think that's quite dangerous. I think it may even be possible to do that. It may be possible to practice in such a way that you dampen or eliminate all of your emotional responses. I started to go in that direction when I first started practicing, and I'm really glad that I kind of woke up to what I was doing. I believe very strongly that emotions are a source of incredible beauty and meaningfulness, and I think moral and ethical response, which is something we didn't really talk about. But being able to kind of tune into your emotions and allow them to guide your action after you've sort of released some of the traumatic amplifications is so critical. And it is the difference between being this it's hard not to use really evocative images here, but the pieced out Buddhist who sits placidly while the world burns, and the righteously angry activist who is taking care of our planet. Yeah. And so from the perspective of Maple, Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth, it's really critical that we relate to our emotions in a wise, skillful, and with full vision of what it means. Yeah. That helpful? Cool. Okay. That's pretty. I guess we ended with me saying something a little bit provocative. I never know who's here, so this might all be super chill with everybody here. I don't know, but there are Buddhists who would be very, very upset about some of the things that I'm saying today. I came from a mostly relatively conservative Buddhist background, or at least I'm familiar with those communities, and so it might seem to you like I'm kind of hedging a little bit too much, but I have life experience which indicates that I ought to hedge in such ways. And if you yourself are in any way really offended or feel like I'm getting Buddhism all wrong or something like that, please do reach out to me. I'd love to engage you in conversation, and totally open to having my views shifted and all of that. So yeah, thank you all for coming. Let's do a little bit of metta. Let's do just 2 minutes of metta practice, and we'll do my favorite Zoom metta. So kind of find yourself in a cool kind of meditation posture. You're already in it. You're already in a meditation posture, and pick somebody on the Zoom screen, one person, and wish them well. I don't know who it is. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May your life be filled with joy and ease. May you be protected and safe. May you know love. You continue to kind of beam this loving attention at this person, this possible stranger. And as you do, just with part of your awareness, realize that somebody is almost certainly sending you that same love right now. Let that in. And kind of creating a tapestry or network of loving friendliness through this Zoom call. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Again, my name is Ryu, and this event is part of the Monastic Academy for the Preservation of Life on Earth. We're from Oak, the California branch, and we are supported by people who want to see this kind of work flourish in the world, communities like this flourish in the world. So if you'd like to support us, you can come for training, or you can give us money, or you can just reach out and say hello, come by, whatever. There's lots of ways to get involved, but hope you enjoyed this session, and we'll be back again next Saturday. Tashin will be here leading the Saturday Sit. So thank you all so much for your presence and your practice and your service, and have a good rest of your weekend. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
See you when I see you, friends.